There has always been a tension in the United States between the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant founding group and those who have sought to come afterwards. And so often, the group that has been excluded, the other, if you will, have been defined in racial terms. And that's what you're seeing work its way out.
I think that question has to be raised locally and explored locally. Because the very meaning of race and racialization is different in various parts of the country, and the history of race relations is still quite different in various parts of the country. Are you from Louisiana? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I think about Louisiana, when I think about race and migration, I think about the post-emancipation moment, when in fact some folks are leaving for Kansas, and when Louisiana, along with a number of other southern states, are trying very hard to recruit new migrants, but to use them to replace black labor on sugar plantations, right? And my first two books were about Sicily, and that's where one of the places they looked. They also looked to China during that period of time. And I think it's in those very local places and those very specific times that you can see how race and immigration intersect. I do not believe that we're going to come up with too many generalizable histories that work at the national level beyond certain things like from 1790 until 1868, only white people could naturalize. After 1868, black people can too, but no Asians, right? So at the national level, it can be very difficult to tell a compelling and a compelling story about the relationship. But when I think about Louisiana, that's the first moment that I think of. And that's the moment of the Burlingame Treaty, right? It's that moment that produced the Burlingame Treaty and this kind of reaching out and saying, well, hey, we've just abolished slavery. We can sign a treaty that gives the Chinese that same inalienable right as African Americans now have, or that Europeans and Latin Americans have had for the previous 60 years or so. Keep it local.
Great. So are you okay holding? Maybe we can grab another.
I just wanted to add one thing, which is I would say that race is a foundational question, but it's not the only foundational question, because there's also a question throughout immigration laws that's gender-based and class-based as well. I mean, there was clearly an idea of which gender of laws based on wanting to privilege the family, the married woman, etc.
Well, and that's a context that's coming up now when you're looking about the immigration reform piece, right? This gendered perspective is coming into it, that if we're prioritizing STEM goals in terms of our immigration policy and deprioritizing families as our nature of our immigration policy, are we not recreating a new gendered immigration status, right? Because we're saying that we're bringing in immigrants from countries where women are not necessarily prioritized in terms of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So if STEM gets the priority, then do women have equal access coming in from other countries as well? That's just something that's come up from some of the sites recently. Anything else?
I just want to ask whether we think about some of the policies today, especially around the detention centers, you know, the ways that criminalization and detention and, the use of those kinds of facilities to sort of, again, sift certain people from other people, and whether that also has a history that would relate to some of what's going on today.
There's a beautiful article that I was just reading on the plane by Natalie Poots, which you probably know, about the criminalization of deportees as a category, and the increasing use of private prisons and private prison companies for detention centers and family detention centers, etc. So I definitely think that it's true that the criminalization, the categorization of immigrants with out proper documents or without documents as criminal And then the criminalization of them on their way to being deported is definitely part of our
Well, that's a
history today.
contemporary issue. I mean, our goal is to connect to contemporary human rights issues. That's a huge one.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, the criminalization makes it very clear, I think. The prisoner is the person who has lost the freedom to move, right? And most of us would agree that that's a just punishment under law. The French Declaration of Man goes to quite some trouble to guarantee that no one will be deprived of that right and be made a prisoner, except under laws that we have all agreed to. Well, immigrants actually don't live under the same set of constitutional protections that citizens do. Asylum seekers don't live under the same sets of protections that refugees do. And transforming a foreigner with or without documents into a prisoner is therefore easier, in a sense, juridically, than to transform you as a citizen native born into a criminal. There's a sort of shorter series of obstacles to be overcome for the foreign-born than for the native-born. And the criminalization works in that we then think, well, and they're criminals. They don't deserve the freedom to move.
Yeah, I think the issue of criminalization and punishment is one of the key obstacles to the current passage of sound immigration policy. Again and again and again in Washington, you hear people talking about punishing those who have come to the United States, even though they are gainfully employed, their children are going to school, they're good members of the community in every way. The word you hear again and again and again is punishment. And so in the Huffington Post 2 years ago, I floated a proposal. And the proposal was to treat immigrants who have come in an undocumented fashion the same way we treat nonviolent criminals, and that is to give them community service, ways to bring them closer to the community in which they're living, not push them farther away. It didn't get very far. I was told by one immigration expert, too many moving parts, too much supervision necessary to do that. But what I was trying to do is break through this notion of criminalizing those who came with no criminal intentions involved, who simply wanted a place to live, place to work, a place to educate their children, and the opportunities we all seek in life.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, the that's being committed in entry without a document is it's comparable to trespassing. That's why I started out with my do not enter, trespassers will be killed, survivors will be shot again. With the loss of memory and loss of commitment of the United States and Americans more generally to the idea of an inalienable right of man to change his home and his allegiance, the national territory of the United States and every other nation state in the world has become the equivalent of private property. And if you enter it without permission, you have trespassed.